Picture Asia's economic giants, nations that powered global growth for decades, falling apart. Factories shuttered, markets in chaos, millions facing ruin. In 2025, a financial catastrophe is unfolding, and the world is watching in shock. Which 12 countries are on the brink, and what's driving this unprecedented collapse? Stay with us to uncover the truth. But before we dive in, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment saying, "I subscribe," and I'll personally welcome you into the family. With that said, a devastating economic crisis is sweeping Asia in 2025, threatening to dismantle 12 major economies, destabilize governments, and upend millions of livelihoods. From bustling trade hubs to emerging powerhouses, these nations are battling collapsing currencies, vanishing jobs, and eroding public trust. Fueled by global trade disruptions, policy missteps, and catastrophic events, these once thriving economies are now teetering on the edge of total collapse. In this gripping deep dive, we reveal the 12 Asian economies facing imminent breakdown, the forces propelling their decline, and the global ripple effects that could reshape our world. Join us as we expose the warning signs. This crisis is closer than you think. Thailand. A silent storm is engulfing Thailand in 2025 as its economy lurches toward collapse under relentless pressures. Once a cornerstone of Southeast Asian stability, the nation is reeling from U.S. tariffs that have slashed demand for its core exports, automotive components, and electronics. Factories are downsizing, shedding thousands of jobs, and the ripple effect is choking consumer spending, leaving retail markets and service sectors in a deep slump. Thailand's historical reliance on global trade, a strength since the 1980s, has become a vulnerability, with no robust domestic economy to absorb the shock of international slowdowns. The tourism industry, a vital lifeline, is in tatters, compounding the crisis. Political unrest, coupled with global economic fears, has driven tourists away, leaving Bangkok's hotels vacant, Phuket's beaches deserted, and Chiang Mai's cultural sites eerily quiet. Street vendors, tour operators, and small businesses, once the lifeblood of local economies, are struggling to survive, with tourism revenue, a major GDP driver, plummeting. Government subsidies to bolster the economy are draining public coffers, while foreign investors, spooked by instability, are diverting funds to safer markets, further weakening Thailand's financial foundation. Thailand's economic vibrancy, built on decades of openness, is fading, threatening a nation once seen as unshakable. The government's inability to diversify the economy, despite years of warnings, has left it ill-equipped to handle simultaneous blows. Urban centers are losing their bustle, rural communities are facing hardship, and public frustration is mounting as prices rise and opportunities dwindle. Without swift reforms, Thailand risks sliding into a deeper crisis, with ripple effects across Southeast Asia. 11. Vietnam. Vietnam's economic engine is faltering in 2025, as the nation once celebrated for its manufacturing boom faces a grim reversal. Factories producing textiles, electronics, and footwear are idling, ports are less congested, and workers are returning to rural villages as jobs evaporate. The country's export-led growth model is crumbling under shrinking global demand and supply chains shifting to cheaper regions like Africa and Latin America. This downturn has triggered mass layoffs, slashing household incomes and stifling domestic consumption, creating a vicious cycle of economic contraction. Foreign direct investment, the catalyst of Vietnam's rapid rise, is drying up as multinational corporations pause projects amid concerns over governance and regional geopolitical tensions. The government's stimulus efforts are faltering, constrained by mounting public debt, while ambitious infrastructure projects, highways, ports, and tech parks, are stalled due to funding shortages. Vietnam's rapid urbanization, a symbol of progress in the 2010s, is now strained, with half-built skyscrapers dotting Ho Chi Minh City's skyline and rural areas grappling with unemployment. The nation's dream of becoming Asia's next economic powerhouse is at risk, as systemic weaknesses come to light. Vietnam's failure to build a diversified economy, coupled with over-reliance on foreign capital, has left it exposed to global shocks. Public confidence is waning, with urban markets quieter and rural communities facing rising poverty. Without bold policy shifts, Vietnam's economic miracle could become a cautionary tale, impacting regional stability and global supply chains. 10. Malaysia. Malaysia is navigating treacherous economic waters in 2025 as its once confident markets waver and public optimism fades. The nation's trade-dependent economy, anchored by electronics and palm oil exports, is buckling as global demand contracts. Factories are cutting shifts, exporters are scaling back, and rural communities reliant on agriculture face declining incomes. Malaysia's historical role as a global supply chain hub, a strength since the 1990s, has become a liability, with no strong domestic market to offset the impact of international slowdowns. The Malaysian ringgit's sharp decline has escalated the crisis, inflating import costs and ballooning national debt. Everyday goods are pricier, squeezing households and sparking discontent from Kuala Lumpur skyscrapers to small towns. Foreign investors, unsettled by currency volatility and policy ambiguity, are pulling funds, destabilizing financial markets. Malaysia's trading hubs, once pulsating with activity, are losing their luster as businesses brace for leaner times and citizens confront a growing cost of living crisis. Malaysia's economic challenges are compounded by its failure to diversify beyond trade, a missed opportunity despite years of economic planning. The government's reactive measures, including subsidies and loan programs, are straining budgets without addressing root causes. Urban unemployment is rising, rural poverty is deepening, and public frustration is mounting as the nation struggles to regain footing. Malaysia's economic decline threatens to erode its regional influence, with broader implications for Southeast Asia's stability. 9. Philippines. The Philippines is grappling with severe economic challenges in 2025 as growth stalls and public anxiety surges. Key industries, construction, retail, and agriculture, are stagnating, dragging down government revenues and limiting funds for healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Rising prices and job scarcity are hitting households hard, with urban centers like Manila and rural provinces alike feeling the strain. The nation's historical resilience, rooted in community spirit since the post-war era, is being tested by a confluence of systemic issues that threaten stability. A critical vulnerability is the Philippines' dependence on overseas remittances, which millions of families rely on for daily expenses. As global economies falter, Filipino workers abroad face job cuts, reducing the flow of funds back home. This drop in remittances stifles local businesses, from small shops to service providers, amplifying the economic slowdown. Government efforts to stimulate growth are hampered by fiscal constraints, leaving the Philippines struggling to regain momentum in a turbulent global landscape. The nation's economic woes are deepened by its failure to address structural weaknesses, such as underinvestment in domestic industries. Urban slums are expanding, rural farmers are facing crop failures, and public services are stretched thin, fueling discontent. The Philippines' once optimistic trajectory, buoyed by steady growth in the 2000s, is now at risk, with potential ripple effects across the region. Without decisive action, the country faces a prolonged crisis that could undermine its social fabric. 8. India. India, once poised to be Asia's next economic superpower, is caught in a whirlwind of financial chaos in 2025, with markets reeling and public unrest growing. A sudden stock market crash has erased billions, shattering investor confidence and triggering widespread panic. Businesses are hemorrhaging value, banks are facing withdrawals, and consumers are tightening belts, creating a feedback loop of economic contraction. Infrastructure projects and digital economy initiatives, once symbols of India's ambition, are stalling as funding evaporates. Foreign investors, rattled by inconsistent policies and governance concerns, are exiting en masse, halting projects and drying up venture capital. Rising youth unemployment has fueled protests in cities like Delhi and Mumbai, amplifying social tensions. India's economic ascent, built on decades of optimism and global integration since the 1991 reforms, is now at risk of unraveling as the nation grapples with a crisis that threatens its global ambitions. The country's failure to address structural issues, such as bureaucratic inefficiencies and unequal growth, has exacerbated the crisis. Rural areas are facing agricultural slumps, urban centers are grappling with joblessness, and public trust in institutions is eroding. India's vision of becoming a global leader is fading, with potential consequences for international markets and regional stability. Without bold reforms, the nation risks sliding into deeper turmoil, reshaping Asia's economic landscape. 7. Laos. Laos is sinking into economic despair in 2025 as debt and mismanagement cripple its modest ambitions. Towering foreign loans, primarily for infrastructure, have backfired, with interest payments consuming the national budget. Exports and tax revenues, too weak to service these debts, leave public services, schools, hospitals, roads underfunded and crumbling. Rural communities reliant on subsistence farming face food shortages and joblessness, eroding public trust in a nation once hopeful for development. Grandiose projects like railways and power plants intended to spur growth have yielded minimal returns, with underused infrastructure becoming financial burdens. Foreign creditors, particularly regional powers, are tightening terms, limiting Laos's options. The nation's vision of modernization, a source of pride in the 2000s, is now a cautionary tale of overborrowing and poor planning, leaving its economy in a downward spiral. Laos's economic collapse is deepened by its isolation from global markets and lack of diversified revenue streams. Urban areas are seeing rising poverty, rural villages are cut off from aid, and public frustration is mounting as basic needs go unmet. The country's small size belies the severity of its crisis, which could destabilize regional trade and investment. Without a viable recovery plan, Laos faces a prolonged descent into economic ruin. We're halfway through, and the stakes are skyrocketing. 6 more Asian economies are teetering, and the fallout could hit us all. If this crisis has you on edge, hit that subscribe button now to stay informed on what's next. Don't miss the rest. This is only getting bigger. Let's dive back in. 6. Turkey. Turkey's economy is imploding in 2025 as years of political turmoil culminate in a full-blown crisis. The Turkish lira has plummeted, doubling import costs and fueling runaway inflation that renders salaries nearly worthless. Businesses are shuttering, food prices are soaring, and urban centers like Istanbul are simmering with protests. The government's authoritarian measures and failure to enact promised reforms have repelled investors, leaving markets in disarray and public finances strained. Corruption scandals and erratic leadership have eroded Turkey's appeal as a regional hub, with foreign capital fleeing and credit ratings plummeting. The nation's strategic position, once a draw for investment since its post-Ottoman modernization, is overshadowed by instability as businesses and citizens brace for further decline. Turkey's vibrant culture and economic potential are being suffocated by a crisis rooted in governance failures. The country's failure to stabilize its currency and address systemic corruption has deepened the crisis. Urban unemployment is spiking, rural communities are facing food insecurity, and public trust in leadership is at an all-time low. Turkey's economic collapse threatens to disrupt regional trade and security, with broader implications for Europe and the Middle East. Without decisive action, the nation risks a prolonged period of chaos. 5. Indonesia. Indonesia, Southeast Asia's largest economy, is spiraling into chaos in 2025 as financial markets crumble and public confidence wanes. The Indonesian rupiah has hit historic lows, inflating import costs and squeezing households, particularly the poor. Businesses reliant on global materials are downsizing, and government debt servicing is draining resources, stifling infrastructure and social programs. Urban centers like Jakarta are grappling with rising costs and shrinking opportunities, fueling public discontent. Investor flight, driven by concerns over excessive government spending and vague fiscal strategies, has battered markets and slashed credit ratings. Indonesia's bold plans for industrial growth and green energy, once regional benchmarks, are faltering as capital dries up. The nation's economic rise, celebrated in the 2010s, is now a fading memory, replaced by a struggle to stabilize a fracturing system. Indonesia's economic woes are compounded by its failure to diversify beyond resource exports and address infrastructure gaps. Rural areas are facing agricultural slumps, urban slums are expanding, and public frustration is mounting as inequality grows. The country's collapse could destabilize Southeast Asia, impacting global commodity markets. Without urgent reforms, Indonesia faces a deepening crisis that threatens its social cohesion. Myanmar. Myanmar is the epicenter of Asia's economic collapse in 2025 as civil war and natural disaster converge to devastate its economy. The ongoing conflict since 2021 has obliterated infrastructure, closed factories, and disrupted trade routes, leaving cities in ruins and rural areas isolated. Foreign investors have fled, domestic businesses are shuttered, and millions face unemployment and poverty, with schools closed and markets empty. A magnitude 7.7 earthquake in Mandalay, striking at a moment of maximum vulnerability, leveled homes and infrastructure, killing thousands and overwhelming an already crippled government. Relief efforts, hampered by conflict and logistical failures, have been inadequate, leaving survivors in makeshift camps. Myanmar's economy, already battered, is now a shadow of its former self. With no path to recovery amid relentless crises, the country's collapse is deepened by its isolation from global aid and trade, exacerbating humanitarian crises. Urban areas are marked by displacement, rural communities are cut off, and public despair is palpable as basic needs go unmet. Myanmar's crisis could spill over, fueling regional instability and refugee flows. Without international intervention, the nation faces a prolonged descent into ruin. 3. China. China, the world's second-largest economy, is faltering in 2025 as its decades-long growth miracle unravels under systemic pressures. Low-end manufacturing, the backbone of its rise, is collapsing as rising wages and competition from cheaper nations drive companies elsewhere. Factories are idling, workers are jobless, and industrial hubs are losing their pulse, shaking the foundation of China's economic model. Urban centers, once symbols of prosperity, are quieter, with businesses scaling back and consumer spending waning. The property sector, a pillar of growth, is in disarray, with major developers defaulting and construction sites abandoned. Ghost cities, built on speculative loans, stand empty, triggering a banking crisis that ripples through local governments and households. The government's efforts to stabilize markets are faltering as global investors retreat amid concerns over debt and transparency, leaving China's economic juggernaut at its most vulnerable point since the 1978 reforms. China's failure to transition to a consumption-driven economy and address mounting debt has exacerbated the crisis. Urban unemployment is rising, rural areas are facing stagnation, and public confidence is eroding. The country's collapse could disrupt global trade and investment, with profound implications for the world economy. Without bold reforms, China risks a prolonged downturn that could redefine its global role. 2. Pakistan. Pakistan is facing a dire economic reckoning in 2025 as systemic weaknesses and external shocks push the nation toward collapse. The country's textile and agricultural exports, critical to its economy, are slumping due to global demand drops and climate-driven crop failures. Factories are closing, unemployment is soaring, and urban centers like Karachi are grappling with rising poverty and social unrest. Pakistan's historical reliance on external aid and exports, a strategy since its founding, has left it exposed without a strong domestic safety net. Crippling energy shortages, exacerbated by unpaid debts to foreign suppliers, are paralyzing industries and households, with frequent blackouts disrupting daily life. The Pakistani rupee's devaluation has inflated import costs, making fuel and food unaffordable for millions. Foreign investors, deterred by political instability and security concerns, are withdrawing, while government efforts to secure international bailouts are faltering, deepening the fiscal crisis. Pakistan's economic collapse is compounded by its failure to address chronic issues like corruption and infrastructure deficits. Rural areas are facing food insecurity, urban slums are expanding, and public frustration is mounting as inequality grows. The country's crisis could destabilize South Asia, fueling refugee flows and security risks. Without urgent intervention, Pakistan faces a deepening spiral that threatens national cohesion. Bangladesh. Bangladesh, once a model of economic progress, is teetering on the edge in 2025 as its export-driven economy buckles under global pressures. The garment industry, a global leader employing millions, is contracting as Western buyers reduce orders amid economic slowdowns. Factories are laying off workers, and rural communities, reliant on remittances from urban migrants, face deepening poverty. Bangladesh's rapid growth since the 1990s, driven by textiles and labor exports, is now at risk, with no diversified economy to fall back on. Rising sea levels and extreme weather, worsened by climate change, are devastating agriculture and displacing coastal populations, straining government resources. The Bangladeshi taka's decline has spiked import costs, fueling inflation and eroding purchasing power. Foreign investors, wary of environmental and political risks, are pulling back, while debt repayments to international lenders are draining reserves, limiting recovery options. Bangladesh's economic woes are deepened by its failure to invest in resilient infrastructure and diversify revenue streams. Urban areas are facing unemployment spikes, rural villages are battling food shortages, and public despair is growing as progress stalls. The country's collapse could disrupt global textile markets and fuel regional instability. Without swift action, Bangladesh's hard-won gains risk unraveling, leaving millions vulnerable to a deepening crisis. You've just witnessed 12 Asian economies on the brink of collapse in 2025, each facing a perfect storm of trade disruptions, policy failures, and unforeseen disasters. These nations, once engines of global growth, reveal how fragile prosperity can be. The question now is, could your country be next? And are you spotting the signs others are missing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. What's unfolding where you are, and where are you watching from? If you haven't seen our last video, it unpacks the early warnings of this crisis that went unnoticed. Check it out for the full picture. One final note. Share this with anyone planning to work, invest, or travel in Asia. They need to know the stakes before it's too late. With that said, thanks for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And until next time.